They say love comes when you least expect it. I always thought that was just something lonely people told themselves to make silence feel a little less cruel. But then came Jack. I wasn't looking for anyone. I had been widowed for almost 5 years. My husband, Paul, left behind a beautiful house in Connecticut, a lifetime of memories, and enough money to make solitude feel secure, at least financially. Emotionally? That was a different story. I filled my days with art, I painted, I volunteered at the local museum, I took long walks with my dog Jasper, and told myself that independence was enough, that I didn't need companionship or laughter in the kitchen or a hand reaching across the bed at night. Then Jack walked into the gallery. It was a Thursday. I remember because the place was quiet, and I was adjusting the lighting on a new exhibit. He stood there for a full 5 minutes, studying one of my abstract pieces, a swirl of red and gold, a storm on canvas. "You painted this?" he asked, his voice deep and warm like a jazz tune you've heard before but can't quite place. I nodded. "Guilty?" He smiled. "It's chaos, beautiful but chaotic, like someone's heart exploded and tried to put itself back together." I remember laughing, genuinely laughing for the first time in weeks. His name was Jack Monroe. He was charming in a way that didn't feel forced, polite but confident. He told me he'd recently moved to the area to start over, though he didn't elaborate. We talked about art, music, books. He was well-read, thoughtful, and listened, really listened. He asked me to coffee that same day. I said yes. Over cappuccinos and shared biscotti, I learned he used to work in real estate, said he got burned by a partner, lost a lot, and decided to leave the business behind. There was something about the way he told his story, honest, a little bruised, that made me believe him. That night, I dreamed about him. Over the next few weeks, Jack became a regular part of my world. He'd surprise me with fresh flowers, walk Jasper with me on chilly mornings, and bring over his favorite movies for cozy nights in. He knew how to cook, really cook, and he made me laugh. Not the polite kind of laughter, but the belly-deep, breathless kind that feels like medicine. It scared me, how quickly I let my guard down. But Jack never pushed. He was patient, gentle. He made me feel seen in a way I hadn't in years. One evening, after we finished a late dinner at my place, he had made lemon herb salmon and homemade mashed potatoes. He reached across the table and took my hand. "I don't want to rush anything," he said softly, "but I haven't felt this way in a long time. You make me feel like I have a future again." My throat tightened. I didn't know what to say, so I squeezed his hand and whispered, "Me too." He moved in a month later. It felt natural, seamless. He was helpful around the house, respectful of my space, and, most of all, kind. He'd kiss me on the forehead while I read, make breakfast before I woke up, and always made me feel safe. My friends were surprised, but happy. "It's good to see you glowing again," one of them said. "Jack seems like a good guy." He was. He really was. We didn't talk about money much. He knew I was comfortable, but he never asked about accounts or assets. He had a job interview at a local property management firm, and I encouraged him. "You don't have to carry everything on your own," I said once, and he just smiled and kissed my cheek. The holidays came fast. Jack helped hang lights, picked out a tree, even wore one of those ridiculous snowman sweaters to a neighbor's party. We danced in the living room to old jazz records and fell asleep on the couch more times than I could count. And then, on New Year's Eve, just as the clock hit midnight, he pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. I gasped. "I know it's soon," he said, kneeling before me, "but I know what I want. I want you. If you're willing to take a leap with me, I promise I'll never let go." Tears welled in my eyes, not because I was unsure, but because I wasn't. I said yes. We married in early spring. It was a quiet ceremony in my backyard. A few close friends, a white dress I bought on a whim, and a man who made me feel like love had found me again. It didn't matter that we'd only known each other a few months. When you know, right? At least, that's what I believed. Looking back now, I wonder what I missed. The small moments, the half-truths, the things I explained away because I wanted so badly to believe this was real. But at the time, everything felt perfect. I was 57 years old, and I had fallen in love again, deeply, wholeheartedly, and I let myself believe I was safe. Because Jack Monroe wasn't just the man I loved, he was the man I let all the way in. The honeymoon phase lasted longer than I expected. Jack was attentive, affectionate, helpful. He took over small household tasks, surprised me with breakfast in bed, and even planted tulips in the garden, because you said spring was your favorite. For a while, I let myself believe I had finally gotten it right. But then, the little things started happening. At first, they felt trivial. I'd find drawers left open, receipts missing, small cash amounts moved from one place to another. Once I noticed one of my late husband's watches wasn't where I usually kept it. Jack brushed it off. Probably just Jasper knocking things over. But something about his tone didn't sit right. Then came the phone calls. Jack started taking calls in the garage or out on the porch, speaking in a hushed tone. When I asked who it was, he'd smile and say, "Just an old buddy checking in," or "a contractor I used to work with." I didn't press at first. We all have pasts, people, stories. But one night, I walked past the guest bathroom and heard him say, "No, she doesn't suspect a thing." My heart stuttered. I stopped mid-step, pressing myself silently against the wall. I couldn't hear the rest of the call. When he emerged minutes later, his expression was calm, as if nothing had happened. He kissed my forehead and asked if I wanted tea. I said yes, but that night, I barely slept. I tried to shake it off. Maybe I misheard. Maybe he was talking about something else entirely. We'd been so happy. He couldn't be hiding something, not from me. But that seed of doubt had been planted. A week later, I was cleaning out the office and found an envelope tucked behind a stack of old tax files. It wasn't sealed. Inside were photocopies of documents I didn't recognize, leases, contracts, even a fake ID with a name I'd never heard before. Daniel Ross. I stared at the photo. It was Jack, or someone who looked exactly like him. My stomach twisted into knots. I confronted him that evening. He didn't yell. He didn't even seem surprised. Instead, he sighed and said, "I was hoping this wouldn't come up. It's nothing shady, I promise." I used that alias years ago when I was dealing with a stalker ex. Had to change my name legally for a while. It was a mess. I should have told you, but I didn't want to drag that into our life. The explanation sounded rehearsed, but plausible. I wanted to believe him. I really did. So I nodded, handed him the envelope, and said, "Just no more secrets, okay?" He smiled and pulled me into a hug. No more secrets. But there were. Jack started spending more time out of the house. He said he was doing freelance work for a former colleague, but he never had invoices. No paper trail. I asked if I could help, maybe assist with bookkeeping, but he insisted it was all being handled. Then the credit card charges began to show up. Expensive dinners I hadn't attended, jewelry stores I'd never visited, hotel rooms in cities we hadn't traveled to. Each time I asked, he had a story. "That charge must be from my buddy's bachelor party," or "It was supposed to be a surprise for you. Now I've ruined it." I began writing everything down. Dates, charges, conversations, not because I was certain he was lying, but because part of me needed proof. Proof that I wasn't going crazy, that the woman who once trusted too easily hadn't returned blindly to the same pattern. One afternoon, while folding laundry, I found a receipt in Jack's jeans pocket, a wire transfer, large, sent to a woman named R. Lanning. When I Googled the name, nothing came up. No local listings, no social media. I stared at that slip of paper for a long time. I knew something was wrong. Still, I said nothing. Instead, I played my part. The doting wife, the trusting partner. I smiled when he came home late. I kissed him goodnight and murmured, "I love you," even as my insides screamed. Because now I needed time. I needed to be sure. I started visiting the library more. Not just for books, but for research. I read about financial fraud, domestic cons, men who marry women for their estates, their pensions, their homes, stories eerily similar to mine. I hired a private investigator under the guise of a friend going through a tough divorce. He understood instantly. Women like me weren't new to him. "I'll be discreet," he said, "but if there's something there, I'll find it." The waiting was torture. Every day felt like walking a tightrope between denial and truth. Part of me still loved him, still wanted to believe that the man who danced with me in the living room and planted tulips was real. But another part, the part I had buried for too long, knew. Jack was hiding something, and it was only a matter of time before I found out what. Then came the voicemail. I was alone at home, organizing the kitchen drawers, when the house phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, so I let it go to voicemail. But the message didn't sound like a sales call. It was a woman's voice. "You think he's faithful? You think you're the only one? Ask Jack about San Diego. Ask him about the ring he promised and never gave. He's playing you, lady, just like he played the rest of us." My hands trembled. I saved the message and played it again. And again. Her voice wasn't angry. It was tired, worn down, like someone who had screamed for so long her throat had nothing left but bitter truths. That night, I looked at Jack across the dinner table. He smiled, told me about a podcast he'd listened to, complained about traffic. I nodded, laughed at the right moments. But inside, I was ice. The man in front of me had lied. Not once, not twice, over and over. And suddenly, I wasn't confused anymore. I was furious, not just at him, but at myself, for falling again, for opening the door so wide, for letting someone else walk in and rearrange everything. But this time, I wasn't going to cry in the dark or run away. This time, I was going to watch. I was going to listen. And when I had everything I needed, every lie, every slip, every document, I was going to bring it all crashing down. When the private investigator called me back, I was in the middle of trimming dead leaves from the garden. Spring had finally come, but the flowers I once cared so deeply for now looked like distant decorations in a life I was no longer living. "Mrs. Carlyle," he said, his tone careful, "there's a lot. A lot." I sat down on the porch steps, phone pressed to my ear, and listened in silence as he detailed Jack's, or rather Daniel Ross's, history. He'd married 3 women over the last 15 years, each time under a different name. Each time the women were older, financially independent, and emotionally vulnerable. Each time they lost everything. "Only one ever filed a police report," he said, "but it was dropped for lack of evidence. The others just disappeared." "Disappeared?" I asked. "Not physically," he clarified quickly. "They withdrew. Some moved away. Some never spoke about it again. One had a nervous breakdown. Another tried to take her life." My mouth went dry. "This isn't just fraud," he added. "It's a pattern. He finds women who are kind, generous, trusting, and breaks them." I thanked him, hung up, and sat there in the early afternoon sun, trembling. It was true then. Jack wasn't just lying to me. He was a predator, a professional one. But instead of crying, I felt something else rise inside me. Resolve. I wasn't going to vanish like the others. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of leaving quietly. He picked the wrong woman this time. That night, I made dinner as usual. Grilled chicken, garlic potatoes, a salad. I poured him a glass of wine, smiled at his jokes, nodded while he talked about a new business venture he was planning in Florida. But inside, I was writing the script for his downfall. The first step was gathering my own proof. I began checking the house when he wasn't around. I found a locked drawer in his office. The key, ironically, was taped underneath one of the bookshelves. Inside were passports, 3 of them, all with different names, cash, receipts, a small black notebook filled with names, dates, and dollar amounts, women's names. One of them was mine. I photographed everything. I then set up a voice recorder in the den. Jack often took calls there, pacing as he talked. I didn't get everything, but I captured enough. Talks of transfers, clearing accounts, and a new target in Atlanta. He was planning to leave me. Not immediately. No, he wanted one more payout, one more signature, one more transfer of property into his name. He was going to clean me out and disappear, but not before I finished what I had started. I contacted a lawyer, an old friend of my late husband's, discreet and fiercely protective. I showed him the photos, the documents, even the audio files. His eyes hardened. "Do not confront him directly," he warned. "If he suspects anything, he'll run." "I don't want him to run," I said. "I want him to fall." So we made a plan. I began transferring my assets into a private trust, something he couldn't touch. I changed all the passwords, alerted my bank, and froze any joint accounts we had opened since the marriage. I also began gathering witness statements, from neighbors who had seen other women at the house when I was away, from the jeweler who remembered him trying to return a necklace I never received, from the hotel concierge who confirmed his multiple solo visits. But the final stroke came with the help of the woman who left the voicemail. Her name was Rachel. She had met Jack, under the name Nick, in San Diego. She had been engaged to him. He vanished a week before the wedding, took her savings, her car, and left behind nothing but a trail of false documents and pain. She agreed to speak on the record. "I don't want revenge," she told me when we finally spoke face to face. "I just want him to stop." So did I. The moment came sooner than I expected. Jack asked me to sign over the deed to the second property I owned in Maine, a vacation house I rarely visited. "It'll be easier for tax purposes," he claimed. "Plus, I've got a contact who can flip it for profit." I smiled and said, "Let's set up a meeting with the notary." What he didn't know was that the notary was actually a legal investigator working with my attorney. Every word was recorded, every form was scanned, every lie sealed into evidence. I played my role to the end. On the outside, I was still the wife who trusted him, who laughed at his jokes and complimented his cooking, who kissed him goodnight and whispered, "I love you," while my thumb pressed record on the phone under my pillow. But inside, I was counting the days. And then, on a quiet Tuesday morning, it happened. The doorbell rang. Jack opened the door in his robe, coffee in hand. 2 officers stood there. "Jack Monroe?" "Yeah?" "You're under arrest for fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit financial abuse." I watched from the stairs as he turned toward me, confused, betrayed. I didn't say a word. They cuffed him and read him his rights. As they led him out, he shouted, "You don't know what you're doing, Olivia. This is a mistake." But it wasn't. It was justice. For me, for Rachel, for the other women whose voices had been stolen. And as the cruiser drove away, a strange stillness settled over the house. It wasn't peace exactly, but it was a beginning. The courthouse was colder than I expected, not in temperature, but in atmosphere. Steel, stone, and silence wrapped around every hallway like a tight band of tension. Reporters lined the steps out front, microphones aimed like weapons. Flashes from cameras erupted with every movement. Jack arrived in a navy suit, wrists cuffed, flanked by 2 officers. His face was stone, lips pressed into a thin line, eyes locked on the pavement. He didn't look at me. I didn't need him to. This wasn't about him anymore. The courtroom filled quickly. Journalists, legal observers, even strangers who had read about the case in the papers or seen it on TV. It had become a national story. The charming man who married wealthy women and vanished with their fortunes. And me, the woman who stopped him. I sat in the front row, shoulders straight, hands steady. They played the recordings. They presented the photos, the documents, the fake IDs, the transfers, the statements from other women who had come forward once Rachel and I broke the silence. Jack's pattern stretched across 2 decades, the aliases, the shell companies, the broken lives. I watched as each truth landed like a stone dropped into water, ripples of gasps, exchanged glances, and finally, silence. His lawyer tried to discredit me. She was emotionally unstable. She had lost her husband and latched onto my client for comfort. What you're seeing here is resentment, an overreaction born of abandonment. But my testimony was clear. I spoke without shaking. I told them about the small lies, the late-night phone calls, the bank statements, the moment I found his black book. I told them how I played along, how I set the trap, how I refused to be his next victim. And when I looked at the jury, I saw it. understanding, disgust, determination. They believed me. The defense rested with little left to say. Jack didn't testify. Perhaps he knew what we all did. There was nothing left to deny. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. When they returned, I held my breath. "Guilty," the foreperson said, "on all counts." There was no applause. Just a collective exhale, like the room itself had been holding its breath alongside me. Jack sat still. No outburst, no plea, just silence. The judge sentenced him to 22 years in federal prison for fraud, identity theft, and financial abuse, with no chance of parole before 15, restitution to be paid to all known victims. The reporters outside erupted. Headlines were already being typed. "The Black Widow Hunter brought to justice. One woman's courage ends a decades-long scam. Olivia Carlisle, from victim to victor." In the weeks that followed, interview requests poured in. Morning shows, podcasts, news specials. At first I declined them all. I didn't do this for attention, but then I received a letter from a woman in Iowa. She wrote about her mother who had been manipulated and bankrupted by a man not unlike Jack. She said my story helped her finally believe her mother wasn't to blame. That's when I realized my voice mattered. So I spoke, calmly, truthfully, about the danger of charm, about manipulation hiding behind romance, about the shame victims carry and how silence protects only the predator. I joined advocacy groups, shared what I'd learned, helped push legislation that required financial background checks for marital property transfers in my state. One story sparked hundreds more. Rachel and I stayed in touch. Sometimes we joked, dark humor forged in shared scars. Sometimes we cried, but mostly we lived, free, finally. And me? I went back to my garden. The tulips bloomed late that year. I spent hours in the dirt, letting the sun hit my shoulders, hands dark with earth and healing. I still paint, not with the same urgency, but with more honesty. I still walk Jasper, still volunteer at the museum. People sometimes recognize me, on the street, in the market, even at the library. They don't ask for photos. They just nod, grateful, quiet. I've started writing, not just journals, but stories about women like me, women who were underestimated, who stood back up. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's this: justice doesn't undo the damage, but it stops the cycle. And truth, no matter how late, still has power.